The morning of September 4th, 1964, arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made pilots smile. Captain James Whitmore stood before the bathroom mirror in his Brooklyn apartment, adjusting his tie with the practiced precision of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. At 42, he was in his prime, experienced enough to command respect, young enough to still feel the thrill every time he climbed into the cockpit. His wife Eleanor had already left for her shift at the hospital, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume and a lipstick-marked coffee cup on the kitchen counter. James checked his watch. 5:47 a.m. Plenty of time to make it to Idlewild Airport for the 8:30 departure. Delta Flight 914 to Miami, a routine run he'd made dozens of times. He grabbed his flight bag, paused at the door to look back at the modest apartment that had been home for 7 years, and locked it behind him. He couldn't have known he would never see that apartment again, never sleep in that bed, never hold Eleanor in his arms once more. At Idlewild, soon to be renamed JFK International, the terminal buzzed with the organized chaos of morning departures. First Officer Michael Chen arrived at 6:15, his brand new wedding ring still feeling foreign on his finger. He'd been married for exactly 3 weeks, and his bride, Susan, had cried when he left that morning. "It's just Miami," he'd told her, kissing away her tears. "I'll be back tomorrow night." Michael was 28, ambitious, and determined to make captain by 35. He carried a worn copy of Advanced Flight Procedures in his bag and spent every spare moment studying. Senior flight attendant Patricia Holloway had worked for Delta for 15 years and had the kind of calm efficiency that came from managing thousands of passengers through turbulence, delays, and the occasional medical emergency. At 39, she was unmarried, married to the job as her mother often complained, and she wouldn't have had it any other way. She loved the travel, the constant motion, the sense of being part of something bigger than herself. Her 2 junior attendants, Barbara Mills and Dorothy Reeves, looked to her for guidance as they prepared the cabin of the Douglas DC-3 for boarding. The passenger manifest listed 57 souls, businessmen heading to meetings, families starting vacations, a young couple on their honeymoon, an elderly woman visiting her sick sister, a jazz musician carrying a saxophone case, college students returning to the University of Miami, a priest traveling to a conference, and a 6-year-old boy named Tommy Hendricks flying alone to meet his father, clutching a small metal airplane his mother had given him for courage. The DC-3 sat on the tarmac like a proud silver bird, its twin engines gleaming in the early morning sun. James completed his pre-flight inspection with meticulous care, running his hands along the fuselage, checking the control surfaces, examining every detail. The aircraft was 12 years old but maintained to perfection. Everything checked out. At 8:15, the passengers began boarding. Patricia greeted each one with her practiced smile, guiding them to their seats, stowing luggage, calming nervous flyers. Tommy Hendricks received special attention. She seated him in 12A by the window, where he pressed his nose against the glass and watched ground crew scurry around like ants. At 8:28, James received clearance from the tower. His voice, calm and professional, crackled over the radio. "Idlewild Tower, Delta 914, ready for departure, runway 31L. Delta 914 cleared for takeoff. Wind 280 at 8, altimeter 30.12, contact departure on 124.5. Cleared for takeoff 31L, Delta 914. The engines roared to life. Michael advanced the throttles smoothly. The DC-3 accelerated down the runway, gathering speed, the white center line blurring beneath them. At 100 knots, James called, "Rotate." Michael pulled back gently on the yoke, and the aircraft lifted gracefully into the air. Passengers felt the familiar stomach drop of takeoff. Tommy Hendricks laughed with delight. "Positive rate," James announced. "Gear up," Michael responded, selecting the landing gear lever. They climbed through 1,000 feet, then 2,000. The New York skyline spread below them, the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, the bridges spanning the East River. It was a view James never tired of, the city of possibilities shrinking to toy-like proportions. At 3,500 feet, something changed. Michael noticed it first, a subtle shimmer in the air ahead like heat waves rising from summer asphalt, except they were at altitude where such phenomena didn't occur. "Captain, are you seeing this?" James leaned forward, squinting through the windscreen. The shimmer intensified, forming into something that looked almost like a vertical wall of translucent water. "What in God's name?" The air traffic controller's voice came through. Delta 912, we're showing some unusual radar returns in your vicinity. Advise you maintain current heading and altitude. Roger, Tower, James replied, but his hand tightened on the yoke. The shimmer was directly ahead now, maybe 200 yards and closing fast. He felt a strange tingling sensation, like static electricity before a lightning strike. The hair on his arms stood up. Should we deviate? Michael asked, tension creeping into his voice. Before James could answer, they hit it. There was no impact, no jolt. Instead, a sensation of sliding, as if the aircraft had suddenly lost all friction with the air. The instruments went haywire. The altimeter spun crazily. The compass needle rotated like a roulette wheel. The radio erupted with static so loud Michael yanked off his headset. Every light on the panel flickered, died, then came back on, and the world outside changed. The sky shifted from clear blue to an odd pearl gray color that James had never seen before. The sun seemed to pulse, its light taking on a quality that was both brighter and flatter. Below, the landscape transformed in ways that made no sense. New York's grid vanishing, replaced by something else, then vanishing again, then returning. It was as if they were flying through a flickering film, frames skipping and jumping. In the cabin, passengers screamed. Coffee cups flew through the air. Luggage tumbled from overhead compartments. Patricia grabbed a seat back to steady herself, her trained composure cracking for the first time in her career. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and keep your seatbelts fastened. Tommy Hendricks wasn't scared. The 6-year-old stared out the window in wonder, watching the impossible light show, his toy airplane forgotten in his lap. The phenomenon lasted perhaps 30 seconds, though later none of them would be able to agree on the duration. Time itself seemed to have lost meaning. Then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The instruments stabilized. The sky returned to normal blue. The sun shone with ordinary yellow light. Below they could see land and water, a coastline that looked right. Christ, Michael breathed. What was that? James didn't answer immediately. He was checking every gauge, every reading, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Altitude, 3,500 feet. Airspeed, 165 knots. Heading, 180 degrees, due south. Fuel, 3/4 full. Everything appeared normal, except nothing was normal. Tower, this is Delta 912, James called into the radio. Static answered him. He tried again. Idlewild Tower, Delta 912, do you copy? Nothing. He switched frequencies, cycling through every channel. Any station, this is Delta 912, on guard. Silence. Radio's dead, Michael said. No, it's working. Look at the indicators. We're transmitting. We're just not getting anything back. Patricia appeared at the cockpit door, her face pale. Captain, the passengers are asking what happened. What should I tell them? Tell them we experienced some unusual atmospheric conditions, but the aircraft is fine and we're proceeding to Miami as planned. James kept his voice steady, authoritative. Everything is under control. But as Patricia returned to the cabin to relay this message, James and Michael exchanged a look that said otherwise. Something had happened up there, something beyond their experience or training. The question was, what? They flew on in radio silence. James tried every frequency, every emergency channel. Nothing. It was as if they were alone in the sky, the only aircraft in existence. An hour passed. The coastline below should have been New Jersey, transitioning to Delaware and Maryland. But something was off about the geography. The shapes were almost right, but not quite. Cities appeared in unexpected places. The interstate highway system seemed more extensive than it should be. Michael, James said quietly, take a look below. Does that look right to you? Michael studied the landscape. I'm not sure. Maybe we drifted off course during that event. Our heading's been constant. And even if we drifted, this doesn't match any part of the eastern seaboard I know. 2 hours in, fuel became a concern. They should have been burning fuel at a predictable rate, but the gauge showed they had more than expected. It was as if time had skipped forward while fuel consumption lagged behind. Patricia brought them coffee. At least the galley still worked. The passengers are getting restless, she reported. Some of them are saying strange things. One man swears he saw something impossible out his window. A woman claims her watch stopped during that turbulence and is now showing the wrong time. Tell them we'll have more information when we land in Miami, James instructed. Keep them calm. But as the 3rd hour approached, Miami should have been coming into view. They saw a large city on the coast, roughly where Miami should be, but it was wrong. Too big, too sprawling. The skyline was dominated by towers that shouldn't exist, buildings that couldn't have been built in 1964. Captain, Michael's voice trailed off. James's hands gripped the yoke so tightly his knuckles turned white. A terrible suspicion was forming in his mind, one so impossible he didn't dare speak it aloud. He tried the radio again. Miami Tower, this is Delta 915, heavy, requesting approach instructions. Static. Then faintly beneath the static voices, fragmentary words in English, but using terminology that sounded wrong. Radar contact, unable to identify, no flight plan, negative transponder. Miami Tower, Delta 914, James repeated. We are approximately 30 miles north of your position, requesting vectors for visual approach. The radio crackled to life with startling clarity. Aircraft calling Miami approach, say again call sign. We have no Delta 914 in the system. Delta 914, Douglas DC-3, departed New York Idlewild at 0830 hours, en route to Miami International. A long pause. Then, aircraft claiming to be Delta 915, what is your position? James read off their coordinates from the navigation instruments. Another pause, longer this time. Delta 914, we have you on radar. Be advised you are in controlled airspace. Squawk 7700 and stand by. 7700, the emergency transponder code. But their aircraft didn't have a transponder of the type the controller seemed to expect. Tower, we are a 1952 Douglas DC-3. We don't have... All aircraft, this is Miami approach control. Be advised we have a potential emergency traffic. Aircraft identifying as Delta 914, a DC-3, claiming to have departed New York this morning. Requesting all traffic maintain situational awareness. The radio erupted with chatter. Multiple voices, overlapping, confused. And James heard something that made his blood run cold. The date. Controllers were time-stamping their communications, and the date they were using was October 12, 2008. 2008. 44 years in the future. That's impossible, Michael whispered, but his face said he knew, somehow, that it was true. Tower, James said, his voice remarkably steady, requesting immediate clearance to land. We have 57 souls on board, fuel for approximately 1 more hour of flight. Roger, Delta 914, cleared direct to Miami International. All other traffic is being vectored away. Emergency equipment is standing by. Descend and maintain 3,000 feet. Report when you have the field in sight. As they descended, both pilots stared at the world below. It was Miami, unmistakably so, but transformed beyond recognition. The city had exploded in size. Highways crisscrossed in complex tangles. The skyline glittered with glass towers. The airport had expanded to many times its 1964 size, with multiple runways and terminals that looked like something from a science fiction magazine. I can see the field, James reported. Delta 914, cleared to land runway 09, wind 100 at 12. Emergency vehicles are standing by. Cleared to land 09. James configured the aircraft for landing. Gear down. Flaps extended. Airspeed 110 knots. The DC-3, at least, behaved exactly as it should. Some things, thank God, remained constant. As they crossed the threshold and James flared for touchdown, both pilots could see dozens of vehicles lining the runway. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, and strange vehicles they didn't recognize. People were everywhere, watching, waiting. The main gear touched with a gentle chirp. James lowered the nose wheel. They rolled out, slowing, until finally stopping on the taxiway. He set the parking brake and shut down the engines. In the sudden silence, he could hear his own heartbeat loud and fast. What do we tell the passengers? Michael asked. James looked at his first officer, young, newly married, his whole life ahead of him. Except that life was gone now, wasn't it? Susan had been waiting for him to come home. Would she still be waiting? Would she even still be alive? The thought was like a knife. We tell them the truth, James said finally, or as much of it as we understand. He stood, straightened his uniform, and walked back into the cabin. 57 faces turned to him, worried, confused, frightened. Tommy Hendricks sat in 12A, still clutching his toy airplane, his eyes bright with excitement rather than fear. Ladies and gentlemen, James began, we have landed safely in Miami. However, I need to inform you that we have experienced an unusual situation. During our flight, something happened that we don't fully understand. The authorities will be boarding shortly to assist us. I ask that you remain calm, stay in your seats, and follow all instructions. You are safe. The aircraft is fine, but I won't lie to you. Something extraordinary has occurred. A businessman in 7C stood up. What does that mean? Extraordinary. What the hell happened up there? Before James could answer, Patricia gasped. She was looking out a window at the approaching vehicles. Captain, those trucks, those cars, they're not from our time. Our time? The businessman pushed past her to look out the window. He went pale. Jesus Christ. Those are 21st century vehicles. That's impossible. The cabin erupted in chaos. Questions, denials, rising panic. James raised his hands for silence, but it did no good. Then, cutting through the noise, a small voice. Mr. Pilot? Everyone turned. Tommy Hendricks stood in the aisle, his toy airplane in one hand. Are we in the future? Like in the comic books? James knelt down to the boy's level. Tommy, I think we might be, but you know what? That just means we're going to have the biggest adventure of our lives. Are you brave enough for that? Tommy nodded solemnly. Yes, sir. Good man. James stood and addressed the cabin again. Listen to me, all of you. We're going to face this together. We're going to walk off this plane with dignity and courage. Whatever has happened, whatever is waiting for us out there, we are going to handle it. Do you understand? Slowly, the panic subsided. Faces set with determination. An elderly woman took her neighbor's hand. The priest began to pray quietly. The jazz musician clutched his saxophone case like a talisman. Outside, a mobile stairway rolled up to the forward door. Patricia opened it and Miami heat poured in. At least that hadn't changed. But standing at the bottom of the stairs was a woman in a uniform, unlike any airline uniform they'd ever seen, accompanied by men in dark suits and others in military uniforms. Captain Whitmore? The woman called up. I'm Director Sarah Chen with Homeland Security. Would you please disembark so we can talk? Director, Homeland Security. James didn't recognize the title or the agency, but the tone was clear. This was authority. He descended the stairs, Michael close behind. At the bottom, they were immediately surrounded by officials with badges, military officers with ranks James didn't recognize, and people holding strange devices, recording devices, cameras that captured their every movement. Director Chen was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked black hair and eyes that had seen too much. She extended her hand. Captain, First Officer Chen, no relation, she added with a slight smile at Michael. I know you must have many questions, but I need to ask you some first. Can you confirm, did you depart from Idlewild Airport in New York this morning, September 4th, 1964? Yes, ma'am. And you experienced some kind of anomaly during your flight? Yes. About 15 minutes after takeoff, the sky changed, the instruments went haywire. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. After that, everything seemed normal except we couldn't raise anyone on the radio. Director Chen exchanged glances with a man beside her, someone in a lab coat with DARPA stenciled on a folder he carried. Captain, I'm going to tell you something that will be difficult to accept. The date today is October 12, 2008. Somehow your aircraft and everyone on board has traveled 44 years forward in time. Even though James had suspected this, hearing it stated so baldly made his legs weak. Behind him, several passengers who had gathered at the open door gasped. One woman fainted. Patricia caught her. That's impossible, Michael said, but without conviction. We know it's impossible, the DARPA scientist said. And yet here you are. Captain, we need to debrief you and your passengers, examine the aircraft, run medical tests. The president has been notified. This is, without exaggeration, the most significant event in human history. The passengers, James said, they have families, people waiting for them. Director Chen's face softened with sympathy. Captain, most of those people have been dead for decades. Some passengers may have families still alive, elderly certainly. We have social workers and psychologists standing by. This is going to be extraordinarily difficult for everyone. But right now I need you to help me keep everyone calm and get them into the buses we've prepared. Can you do that? James looked back at his aircraft, at the faces crowding the windows. 57 people who had left 1964 3 hours ago and arrived in 2008. 57 lives utterly shattered. He thought of Eleanor, waiting for him at their apartment. Except she wasn't waiting, was she? She'd been waiting for 44 years. Was she still alive? If so, she'd be 86 now. Did she remarry? Did she have children with another man? The thought was like a wound, but he was still the captain. These people were still his responsibility. "I'll get them off the plane," he said, "but I want your word they'll be treated with dignity and respect. They're not lab rats. They're people." "You have my word, Captain. We'll do everything we can to help all of you adjust to your new circumstances." New circumstances. What a sanitized phrase for having your entire world ripped away. James returned to the cabin and began the process of shepherding his passengers into a future they couldn't have imagined in their wildest dreams. As each person descended the stairs, they looked around at the transformed airport, the incredible technology, the impossible reality of where, when, they now found themselves. Tommy Hendricks came down holding Patricia's hand. At the bottom, he looked up at Director Chen and asked, "Do you have flying cars?" Despite everything, Chen smiled. "Not yet, sweetie, but we have a lot of other amazing things to show you." As the last passenger disembarked and buses carried them away to some government facility, James stood alone on the tarmac with Michael, looking at their DC-3. It sat there, a perfect specimen of 1964 aviation technology, surrounded by 2008 emergency vehicles with LED lights and GPS systems and radios that could connect to satellites in space. "Mike," James said quietly, "we're the only two people in the world who will ever truly understand what we went through up there." Michael nodded, his young face aged by shock. "What do we do now? We survive. We adapt. We figure out how to live in a world that moved on without us." James put a hand on his first officer's shoulder. "And we take care of our crew and passengers. They're going to need us." As they walked toward the waiting vehicles, James cast one last look at the sky. The ordinary September sky of 2008 that looked exactly like the September sky of 1964. Somewhere up there, in that vast blue expanse, was an answer to what had happened. Somewhere up there was an explanation for how 57 people had slipped through the fabric of time itself. But for now, all James Whitmore knew was that he had landed his last flight, and his new life, whatever that might mean, was about to begin. The facility they were taken to was unlike anything the passengers of Delta Flight 914 had ever seen. Located in a converted warehouse complex north of Miami, it had been hastily prepared as temporary housing for what the government was calling the chrononauts, a term James found both absurd and oddly fitting. The main building featured smooth glass walls, automatic sliding doors that responded to motion, and lights that turned on without switches. Everything was clean, white, and sterile in a way that made James think of hospitals or prisons. They arrived in buses with digital displays instead of printed route signs, traveling on highways with electronic signs showing traffic conditions and advertisements that changed every few seconds. The passengers pressed their faces to the windows, watching a Miami that bore little resemblance to the city they should have landed in. Where low-rise pastel buildings should have been, glass towers reached for the sky. The cars were aerodynamic, strange shapes with curved edges and no chrome. And everywhere, people walked around staring at small, glowing rectangles in their hands. "What are those things?" Patricia whispered to James, pointing at a woman on the sidewalk, her face illuminated by a device she held mere inches from her nose. "I don't know," James admitted, "but everyone has one." Inside the facility, they were separated into groups. Medical examinations came first. Blood draws, X-rays with machines that looked like props from a science fiction movie, and consultations with doctors who carried tablet computers instead of clipboards. The physicians were gentle, but clearly fascinated. "Your cellular structure is completely normal," one doctor told James. "Whatever happened to you, it didn't age you. At the cellular level, you're still a 42-year-old man from 1964. It's extraordinary." After medical clearance, they were assigned rooms, small but private, with attached bathrooms featuring toilets that flushed automatically, and showers with temperature controls James needed 3 tries to figure out. Each room had a large flat-screen television mounted on the wall, but no one had explained how to operate it yet. The bed was comfortable at least. Some things remained constant. That evening, they gathered in a common room for what Director Chen called an orientation session. All 57 passengers were present, plus James and Michael and the 3 flight attendants. A large screen dominated one wall, and Chen stood before it with a remote control, a device James recognized in function, if not form. "I know today has been overwhelming," Chen began. "I won't pretend to understand what you're feeling, but I'm going to give you some context for where you are and what has happened in the 44 years since September 4th, 1964. She clicked the remote. The screen came to life with images that made the audience gasp. The moon landing, the Twin Towers falling on September 11, 2001, the Berlin Wall coming down, Desert Storm, the Oklahoma City bombing, Challenger exploding, President Reagan, President Clinton, President Bush, wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the collapse of the Soviet Union, images of computers shrinking from room-sized mainframes to devices that fit in a palm, the internet, cell phones, digital cameras, GPS, social media. 44 years of history compressed into 30 minutes. People wept. Some laughed in disbelief. Others sat in stunned silence. "The man I'm supposed to marry," one young woman said, her voice breaking. "We were going to have 4 children. We planned it. 2 boys, 2 girls. Is he?" Chen's face was compassionate but firm. "We're working on tracking down information about all your families and loved ones. It's a massive undertaking. We have a team of researchers and social workers dedicated to this. But I need to prepare you. Many of the people you knew are no longer with us. Some are. For those who are still alive, they are now in their 70s, 80s, even 90s. They have lived entire lives. They moved on. Moved on? A businessman, Harold Kramer, his nameplate had read, Executive Vice President, stood up, his face flushed with anger. "My son was 3 years old." 3? You're telling me he's 47 now? That I missed his entire life? His childhood, his graduation, his wedding, if he even got married? Everything? Mr. Kramer, I am so deeply sorry. But yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Kramer sank back into his chair, his anger collapsing into grief. The woman next to him, not his wife, who had stayed home in New York, reached over and took his hand. They sat there, 2 strangers united by impossible loss. Tommy Hendricks raised his hand like he was in school. "Ma'am, is my daddy still alive?" Chen checked a tablet one of her assistants handed her. "Tommy, your father is alive. He's 66 years old now. He remarried in 1971 and had 2 more children. You have a half-brother and half-sister. Will I get to see him? We're making arrangements for family reunifications. But Tommy, you need to understand, your father is an old man now, and you're still 6 years old. This is going to be very strange for both of you." The priest, Father Martin O'Connor, spoke up, his Irish accent still strong. "What about our legal status? Are we dead? I imagine we were all declared dead years ago." "You were," confirmed a lawyer who stepped forward, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and an iPad covered in notes. "Legally, all of you were declared dead 7 years after your disappearance in 1971. Death certificates were issued. Life insurance was paid out. Estates were settled. Property was distributed. Now the federal government is working with state governments to reverse those declarations and restore your legal identities. It's unprecedented. We're literally writing new law as we go." "What about money?" asked a practical-minded woman named Dorothy Crane, a school teacher from New Jersey. "I had a savings account, a pension. Did that just disappear?" The lawyer grimaced. "This is complicated. Your savings account, if the bank still exists, accrued some interest but was eventually escheated to the state as abandoned property. Your pension, if the company still exists, and if the pension fund is still solvent, presents a unique legal question. Do you get 44 years of pension payments? We don't know yet. Congress is working on a compensation package for all of you. It won't replace what you lost, but it will ensure you're not destitute." Michael Chen, First Officer Chen, had been silent through most of this, but now he stood. "My wife, Susan. I need to know about Susan." Director Chen, James had to remind himself no relation despite the shared surname, consulted her tablet. "Michael, your wife Susan Chen, née Harding, is still alive. She's 72 years old. She lives in Portland, Oregon. She remarried in 1978 to a man named David Monroe. They had 1 daughter. She's a grandmother now. We've contacted her. She's in shock, as you might imagine. She asked me to tell you that she never stopped loving you, but she had to move on. She couldn't wait forever for a dead man." Michael's face crumpled. He sat down heavily, and James moved to sit beside him, putting an arm around the younger man's shoulders. Susan had waited 14 years. 14 years of hoping, mourning, and finally accepting that Michael was gone. She'd rebuilt her life, and now, impossibly, her first husband had returned, not a day older than when she'd kissed him goodbye that morning in 1964. "What about families who don't want to see us?" Patricia asked quietly. "Surely some people would rather we stayed dead." We're ghosts. Inconvenient, impossible ghosts. Some families have expressed reluctance, Director Chen admitted. They don't know how to process this. We have counselors available for them too. This isn't just traumatic for you, it's traumatic for everyone who loved you and learned to live without you. James thought of Eleanor. Sweet, competent Eleanor with her nurse's uniform and her gentle hands. She'd be 86 now if she was still alive. Did she remarry? Did she have children? Children who should have been his? The thought of Eleanor, old, gray-haired, stooped with age, was almost impossible to reconcile with his last memory of her kissing him goodbye, her hair still dark, her face unlined. Captain Whitmore? Director Chen called his attention back to the present. We have information about your wife. James's heart hammered. Is she? She's alive. Eleanor Whitmore, née Sullivan, is 86 years old. She lives in a retirement community in Sarasota, Florida. She never remarried. After you were declared dead, she threw herself into her nursing career. She became the director of nursing at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital and worked there until she retired in 1989. She has no children. Captain, she's asked to see you. Never remarried. No children. 44 years alone. Faithful to a dead man's memory. The magnitude of Eleanor's loyalty and loss hit James like a physical blow. He nodded mutely, not trusting his voice. Over the following days, the facility became a strange kind of limbo, where 1964 met 2008. They were given new clothes, jeans that felt too casual, shirts with synthetic fabrics that didn't breathe like cotton, shoes with rubber soles that were admittedly more comfortable than leather. Patricia and the other women marveled at modern undergarments, the lack of girdles and garters, the stretchy fabrics that moved with the body. They were introduced to modern technology through careful patient tutorials. Young tech specialists from the government, people who'd grown up with computers and couldn't remember a time without the internet, tried to explain email, web browsers, search engines, social media. It was like teaching medieval peasants about electricity. Tommy Hendricks adapted fastest. Children were resilient, plastic, able to accept new realities that shattered adults. He took to the iPad they gave him with the enthusiasm of a kid with a new toy, quickly figuring out how to play games and watch videos. He showed Dorothy Reeves, the flight attendant, how YouTube worked, pulling up videos of airplanes taking off and landing. Look, Miss Reeves, you can watch anything. They have every TV show ever made. Dorothy, who was 34 and had never married, had been devastated to learn that both her parents had died, her father in 1978, her mother in 1995. Her younger sister was still alive, but she was 66 now, a great-grandmother living in a nursing home with dementia. Dorothy wouldn't know her, couldn't know her. The sister she remembered was a 22-year-old college student with dreams of becoming a lawyer. Harold Kramer spent hours with one of the researchers, a kind young woman who helped him piece together his son's life. Daniel Kramer had indeed grown up. He'd become an architect. He'd married, divorced, remarried. He had 3 children of his own, Harold's grandchildren, except Harold had never been a grandfather. Daniel lived in Seattle now, and he wasn't sure he wanted to see his father, a father who was now 5 years younger than Daniel himself. He thinks I abandoned him, Harold said to James one night in the common room. They'd formed an unlikely friendship, the captain and the businessman. In his mind, I'm the father who left and never came back. He was 3 years old. He doesn't remember me. How do I explain to a 47-year-old man that I didn't choose to leave him? You tell him the truth, James said, and you hope he can understand that sometimes the impossible happens. Father O'Connor struggled differently. The Catholic Church he'd known had changed dramatically. Vatican II had transformed liturgy and practice. Priests no longer said Mass in Latin. Nuns no longer wore traditional habits. The sex abuse scandals had rocked the Church's moral authority. The priest he'd been traveling to meet in 1964, Father Thomas Flynn, had died in 1982. I don't recognize my own faith anymore, he confessed to James one evening. Or perhaps I do, and that's worse. Perhaps this is what it was always meant to be, and I'm a relic of a more rigid time. The jazz musician, a black man named Leonard Washington, discovered that the civil rights movement he'd been a part of had achieved incredible victories, and yet racism persisted in new, insidious forms. He watched videos of Barack Obama running for president with tears streaming down his face. A black president, he whispered. In my lifetime. In my lifetime. Leonard, James said gently, it's not your lifetime. Not anymore. Isn't it? I'm still alive. Still breathing, still here. Maybe it's not the lifetime I planned, but it's the one I've got. The honeymoon couple, Robert and Diane Morrison, married just 2 weeks before the flight, clung to each other with desperate intensity. Everyone they'd known from their wedding was either elderly or dead. The world they'd been ready to start their lives in was gone, but they had each other, and that was something. That was everything. "We can build a new life," Diane said firmly. "People move to new countries, learn new languages, adapt to new cultures. This is just a more extreme version of that." Research teams descended on the DC-3, examining every rivet, every wire, every instrument. Scientists from NASA, DARPA, MIT, and a dozen other institutions crawled over the aircraft, taking samples, running tests, analyzing the metallurgy and electronics. They found nothing unusual. It was exactly what it appeared to be, a 1952 Douglas DC-3 in excellent condition. There's no residual radiation, no exotic particles, no quantum fluctuations we can detect, Dr. Sarah Nakamura, the lead physicist, told James during one of his interviews. "It's as if your aircraft simply skipped, like a stone skipping across water, except the water is time itself." "Can it happen again?" James asked. "We don't know. We don't even know how it happened the first time. There was unusual solar activity on September 4, 1964, a solar flare event. And there's been unusual solar activity in the past few weeks too. Some scientists think there might be a connection, that perhaps certain atmospheric conditions combined with solar radiation can create temporary ruptures in space-time. But that's pure speculation. We're trying to understand a phenomenon that shouldn't exist. Doctor, I have 57 people who are proof that it does exist. 57 people in one aircraft. You're all the data we have. Captain, would you be willing to fly that plane again? Under controlled conditions with instruments monitoring everything?" James thought about it. Climb back into the cockpit of the DC-3, knowing that they might slip through time again? Knowing that they might end up in 2052, or 1920, or some other impossibly distant point? "No," he said finally. "I'm done flying. That aircraft brought us here, wherever here is, and I think it should stay grounded. Some things shouldn't be tested." Dr. Nakamura looked disappointed but understanding. "The government is making the aircraft a permanent exhibit at the Smithsonian, a monument to the impossible." A week after their arrival, the family reunions began. They were carefully orchestrated with psychologists present, in private rooms where people could react without cameras or crowds. James wasn't ready to see Eleanor yet. He told himself he needed more time to adjust, to understand this new world. But the truth was he was terrified. Terrified of seeing Eleanor old, terrified of seeing disappointment or regret in her eyes, terrified of discovering that the woman he loved no longer existed, replaced by a stranger who'd lived an entire life without him. Michael met Susan first. James was with him when the door opened and an elderly woman with gray hair and a cane walked in, supported by a middle-aged woman introduced as her daughter, Michael's stepdaughter technically. "Michael?" Susan's voice trembled. "Is it really you?" "It's me, Susan. It's really me." She moved toward him slowly, reaching out to touch his face with wrinkled hands. "You haven't changed. You're still 28. Still my Michael." "Susan, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I left you. I'm sorry you had to—" "Don't." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "Don't apologize for something that wasn't your choice. I waited for you. For 14 years I waited. And then I accepted you were gone and I built a life without you. A good life. I loved David. I love my daughter. But God, Michael, I never stopped loving you. Not even after I remarried. Is that terrible?" "No," Michael said. And then he was crying, and so was Susan, and they held each other, this young man and this old woman who had once been young together, who had once had a future that this impossible present had stolen. James watched from the doorway and wondered if his reunion with Eleanor would be anything like this. He wondered if love could survive 44 years and an impossible gulf of time. Tommy Hendricks met his father in a session that broke everyone's heart. Robert Hendricks walked in, a 66-year-old man with gray hair and a slight paunch, wearing jeans and a polo shirt, and stared at the 6-year-old son he'd last seen 44 years ago. "Tommy?" His voice cracked. "My God, you're still 6. Tommy looked at this old stranger and tried to reconcile him with his daddy. "Did you get old because you didn't eat your vegetables?" Robert laughed through his tears. "Something like that, buddy." He knelt down with some difficulty. His knees weren't what they used to be, and opened his arms. "Can I hug you?" Tommy considered this, then nodded and walked into his father's embrace. They stayed like that for a long moment, the old man and the little boy, separated by time, but connected by blood. "I have so much to tell you," Robert said, "about your brother and sister, about your grandmother, my mom, she's still alive, she's 91, about your whole family if you want to know." "I want to know everything," Tommy said seriously. "Miss Chen says I'm going to have to go to school to learn about all the history I missed, but I think learning about my family is more important than learning about presidents." Harold Kramer's reunion with his son Daniel didn't go as well. Daniel was a tall man with thinning hair and his father's nose, and he stood in the meeting room with his arms crossed, his body language screaming defensiveness. "I don't know what you want from me," Daniel said. "A relationship? Forgiveness? I'm 47 years old. I have children who are older than you are. This is insane." "I don't want anything except to tell you that I didn't choose to leave," Harold said. "I got on a plane to go to a business meeting in Miami. I was supposed to be back the next day. I don't know what happened up there, but I lost 44 years. I lost your entire childhood. Do you think I wanted that? What I think is that this is the cruelest joke the universe ever played. You're my father, but you're 5 years younger than me. How do I process that? How do I call you Dad when you look like you could be my younger brother? I don't know, Daniel. I don't know how any of this works, but I'm asking, I'm begging for a chance. Let me know you. Let me meet my grandchildren. Give me something, even if it's just an hour of your time." Daniel's armor cracked slightly. "My daughter Emma is getting married in 3 months. If you want to come to the wedding, I won't stop you, but I can't promise anything more than that." It was something. It was a start. Not everyone wanted reunions. Dorothy Reeves's sister, in her dementia, couldn't understand who Dorothy was. "She keeps calling me Rebecca," Dorothy told Patricia. "That was her college roommate. She doesn't know me. I'm a stranger to her." The young woman who'd been engaged, Carol Simmons, learned that her fiancé had waited 5 years before marrying someone else. He was now 76 and had been married to the same woman for 39 years. He had no interest in seeing Carol again. "It would upset my wife," his daughter explained apologetically. "You have to understand. He mourned you. He moved on. Opening this up again would be too painful." Father O'Connor requested a meeting with the Archbishop of Miami. The meeting was granted, and the elderly Archbishop, himself only 62, younger than Father O'Connor would have been if he'd aged normally, listened with fascination to the priest's story. "What do you want to do, Father?" the Archbishop asked. "I want to continue my priesthood. I want to serve, but I don't know if I can serve in this new church. I don't know if I fit." "Father O'Connor, the church has always been about adapting to changing times while maintaining eternal truths. You've been given a unique perspective. You've seen that change in a single day rather than gradually. I think your insights could be valuable. If you wish to continue your ministry, I will find a place for you." And so Father O'Connor became the chaplain for the other chrononauts, offering spiritual guidance to people who were grappling with losses that transcended normal grief. 2 weeks after their arrival, James finally agreed to see Eleanor. He dressed carefully in the modern clothes that still felt strange, ran his hands through hair that was only starting to show gray, and walked to the private meeting room with his heart hammering against his ribs. Eleanor was already there, seated in a comfortable chair, her cane resting against the armrest. She wore a simple blue dress and pearls, always pearls, even in 2008. Her hair was white, her face deeply lined, her hands gnarled with arthritis. But her eyes were still Eleanor's eyes, still bright and intelligent and filled with warmth. "James." She said his name like a prayer. "I thought I'd imagined it. I thought I'd finally lost my mind, but it's really you." He crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her aged hands in his. "Eleanor. God, Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I left you. I'm sorry you waited. I'm sorry for all of it." "Hush." She touched his face, her fingers gentle despite the arthritis. "You're still young, still my handsome James, and I'm an old woman. How is this fair? It's not. None of this is fair. I waited for you," she said. "Everyone told me to move on, to accept that you were gone, and eventually legally I had to, but in my heart I never gave up. I told myself that if there was any chance, any possibility that you'd come back, I would still be here. I would still be your Eleanor. And now here you are, and I'm 86 years old and you're 42, and we've been given the cruelest gift in the world." "What do you mean?" "We've been given a second chance to see each other, to say goodbye properly. But we can't have a life together. Look at me, James. I'm old, I'm tired. I have maybe 5 good years left if I'm lucky. And you're still young, still vibrant. You have decades ahead of you. What kind of marriage could we have? I don't care, James said fiercely. I don't care if we have 5 years or 5 months or 5 days, you're my wife. You've always been my wife, that never changed. Eleanor smiled, tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. Then let's not waste the time we have. Tell me about the flight. Tell me what happened up there. Tell me everything. So James told her. He told her about the shimmer in the sky, the instruments going crazy, the sensation of sliding through something that wasn't quite air. He told her about the fear and confusion, the passengers screaming, little Tommy Hendricks staring out the window in wonder. He told her about landing in a future that looked like science fiction, about learning that everyone he knew was old or dead, about the desperate loneliness of being a man out of time. And Eleanor listened, holding his hands, occasionally wiping away tears. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You know what I think? She said finally. I think you were given a gift too. Not just the cruelty of losing your old life, but the opportunity for a new one. James, you're 42 years old in a world that's full of wonders you never imagined. You could learn to fly the new aircraft. They have jets now that can cross the country in hours. You could see places we only dreamed about. You could build a whole new life. I don't want a new life. I want the life we should have had. But we can't have that. So we need to make peace with what we do have. Eleanor squeezed his hands with surprising strength. Promise me something. Promise me that after I'm gone, you'll live, really live, not just exist, mourning what you lost. You're too young to spend the rest of your life looking backward. Eleanor, promise me, James, please. He couldn't deny her. Not when she was looking at him with those eyes. Not when he knew their time was so limited. I promise. But not yet. For now, let's just be together. Yes, Eleanor said. For now, let's just be together. They sat there in that small room, the 42-year-old pilot and his 86-year-old wife, holding hands across an impossible gulf of time, making the most of an impossible reunion. Outside, the world of 2008 continued its rapid pace. Inside, two people who loved each other pretended, just for a moment, that time had never separated them at all. 3 months had passed since Delta Flight 914 landed in a world that had moved on without them. 3 months of daily therapy sessions, educational seminars about modern technology and culture, legal proceedings to restore their identities, and the slow, painful process of accepting that their old lives were gone forever. The government facility had become less of a holding area and more of a transition house, a place where 57 people learned to be citizens of 2008. Eleanor had stayed in Miami, taking a room at a hotel near the facility so she could see James daily. They fell into a routine, breakfast together in the hotel dining room, walks around the grounds when her arthritis wasn't too bad, afternoons spent watching the television shows and movies she'd enjoyed over the decades that he'd missed. She showed him history through her eyes, the moon landing that had made her cry with joy, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. that had made her despair, the fall of the Berlin Wall that had filled her with hope. You lived through such extraordinary times, James said one evening as they watched footage of President Kennedy's funeral. We all do, Eleanor replied. Every generation thinks their time is special and they're all right. History is always extraordinary when you're living through it. But there was a fragility to their reunion that neither could ignore. Eleanor tired easily now. Some mornings she struggled to get out of bed. Her doctor, who visited weekly, was honest with James. Eleanor's heart was weak. She might have a year, maybe 2. Each day together was borrowed time. The other chrononauts were building their new lives with varying degrees of success. Michael Chen had relocated to Portland to be near Susan, though their relationship was complicated in ways neither could have imagined. Susan's husband David had passed away 2 years earlier, which removed one obstacle, but the age difference created others. How did you have a romantic relationship when one partner was 28 and the other was 72? We're figuring it out, Michael told James during a phone call. James was still amazed by phones. These devices that had no cords, that you carried in your pocket, that could connect you to anyone anywhere in the world instantly. We're not trying to recreate what we had. We can't. But we can build something new. She's teaching me about the life she lived, and I'm just grateful to know her again. Are you happy? A pause. I'm learning to be. Some days are harder than others. I see couples our age, my age, the age I should be, and I feel this disconnect. But then Susan laughs at something I say. and I hear echoes of the girl I married. And it's enough. Tommy Hendricks had moved in with his father in Chicago. The adjustment was difficult for both of them. Robert tried to be the father of a 6-year-old while also being a grandfather to actual adults. Tommy struggled with school. The other children his age knew nothing about his situation and found him odd and out of place. He made friends eventually, other children drawn to his stories about the old days and the airplane that had traveled through time. He's resilient, Robert told James during one of their regular check-ins. The government had set up a support network for all the chrononauts with regular video calls and an online forum where they could share experiences. Kids are elastic in ways adults aren't. He accepts this new world easier than I could. How are his siblings handling it? Brian is fascinated. He's a physics professor and he keeps trying to understand what happened scientifically. Melissa is more skeptical. I think she resents Tommy in some ways. She grew up with a father who was grieving his lost son, and now that son is back, still 6 years old, still getting all the attention. Family dynamics are complicated enough without time travel. Harold Kramer had attended his granddaughter's wedding and, to his surprise, had found himself welcomed into Daniel's family. His grandchildren were curious about him, asking endless questions about 1964. Emma, the bride, had asked him to walk her down the aisle alongside Daniel. "You're still my grandfather," she'd said. "It doesn't matter that you're younger than my dad. You're family." That wedding had been Harold's turning point. Standing there in his rented tuxedo, so different from the formal wear of 1964, watching his granddaughter marry a young man who seemed decent and kind, Harold had felt a connection to this future he'd been thrown into. He had a place here. It was strange. It was wrong. But it was something. Father O'Connor had found his calling in ministering to the other chrononauts. He held weekly services in the facility's makeshift chapel, attended by about half the passengers. His sermons were different now, less about doctrine, more about acceptance and grace. He talked about Job, about being tested by circumstances beyond understanding. He talked about the Israelites wandering in the desert, about finding meaning in displacement. "We are all pilgrims," he told his congregation one Sunday. "We are all strangers in a strange land, but we are not alone. We have each other and we have faith, not just faith in God, but faith that we can build new lives from these ruins." Dorothy Reeves had found work, real work, as a flight attendant for a major airline. She'd had to recertify, learning new procedures and safety protocols, familiarizing herself with aircraft that looked like they belonged in a Flash Gordon serial. But the core of the job remained the same, taking care of passengers, ensuring their safety and comfort. Flying gave her purpose. "I'm good at this," she told Patricia over coffee one afternoon. "I understand it, and when I'm at 30,000 feet I can pretend that time is just something we're flying through, not something that's trapped us." Patricia herself had struggled more. At 39, she should have had decades of career ahead of her, perhaps eventually becoming a training supervisor or moving into airline management. Instead, she was starting over in an industry that had changed dramatically. Age discrimination was supposedly illegal, but she saw the way interviewers looked at her when she admitted her situation. She was both too old and too young, experienced and completely inexperienced simultaneously. Eventually, she'd found her niche not in flying but in speaking. Universities invited her to give lectures about her experience. Museums wanted her for panel discussions. She'd even signed with a literary agent who was helping her write a book about Flight 912. The working title was The Long Flight Home, though Patricia wasn't sure home existed anymore. The jazz musician, Leonard Washington, had discovered that jazz had evolved in beautiful and unexpected ways during his absence. He attended concerts in Miami, sitting in with local bands, his saxophone producing the same rich tones it had in 1964 while incorporating new influences and styles. His wife had died in 1995, which had devastated him, but his daughter, now 62, had welcomed him with open arms. "Dad," she'd said at their reunion, "I'm old enough to be your mother. How weird is that?" "Pretty weird," Leonard had admitted, "but I'll take weird over gone." She'd introduced him to her children and grandchildren, and Leonard found himself teaching his great-grandchildren, children who weren't born yet when he'd boarded Flight 914, to play music. The past and future intertwined in strange and beautiful ways. The Morrison couple, Robert and Diane, had decided to fully embrace 2008. They bought a small house in Fort Lauderdale with money from the Government Compensation Fund, learned to navigate the internet, got smartphones, and even started a blog documenting their experiences. Newlyweds Out of Time became modestly popular, attracting readers fascinated by their unique perspective. "We're doing what we'd planned to do anyway," Diane explained during a video interview that went viral. "We're building a life together. We're learning about the world. We're just doing it in a different time than we expected. Love doesn't care about when you live, it cares about how you live." Their optimism was infectious, and gradually, the narrative around the chrononauts began to shift. The initial shock and scientific fascination gave way to human interest stories about resilience and adaptation. Books were written. A documentary premiered on PBS. There was talk of a feature film, though James had firmly refused to sell the rights to his story. "Some things aren't entertainment," he'd told the producers who'd approached him with a six-figure offer. "This is our lives, not a plot device." But he couldn't control the larger narrative. Flight 914 had captured the world's imagination in a way few events did. Everyone had an opinion. Scientists debated the mechanism. Philosophers discussed the implications. Religious leaders saw divine providence or cosmic warning. Conspiracy theorists spun elaborate tales about government experiments and secret time machines. The aircraft itself, true to Dr. Nakamura's word, had been transported to the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. James attended the dedication ceremony, standing before his old plane now encased in glass and surrounded by placards explaining the impossible journey. Visitors filed past, taking photos, reading the display. Some touched the glass reverently, as if the aircraft were a religious relic. "How does it feel?" asked the museum curator, a woman named Dr. Patricia Henderson. "Seeing your plane become history?" "Strange," James admitted. "That aircraft was just a tool, a machine for getting from one place to another. Now it's a monument to something none of us understand. The Wright Flyer is just wood and fabric, but it represents humanity's dream of flight. Your DC-3 represents something just as profound, proof that the impossible can happen. That's worth preserving." 4 months after their arrival, Eleanor's health began to fail rapidly. The doctor was blunt. She had weeks, not months. James moved into her hotel room, sleeping in a chair beside her bed, holding her hand through the long nights when pain kept her awake. "I'm not afraid," Eleanor told him one evening. "I've lived a long life. I've seen wonders. And I got to see you again. That's more than most people get. I'm not ready to lose you again. You're not losing me. I was never really yours to lose, not after 1964. We were both just visiting each other's timelines. Mine is ending. Yours is just beginning." She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. "Remember your promise. Live, James. Really live. I don't know how. You'll figure it out. You're a pilot. You've always been good at navigating the unknown." Eleanor Whitmore, née Sullivan, died on January 15, 2009, with James holding her hand. She was 86 years old. She'd lived 44 years without her husband, and then, impossibly, gotten 4 months with him before the end. James liked to think those 4 months had made up for something, though he knew no amount of time could compensate for what they'd lost. The funeral was well attended. Eleanor had touched many lives during her nursing career, and colleagues from decades past came to pay respects. Michael and Susan were there. Patricia came. Father O'Connor officiated, speaking about love that transcended time, about faithfulness and patience, and the mysterious ways grief and joy intertwined. James stood at the graveside, so different from the simple funerals of 1964, with its green artificial turf covering the grave dirt, its mechanized lowering device, its modern headstone, and felt utterly alone. Everyone else from his time had adjusted, found new purposes, built new lives, but Eleanor had been his anchor, his connection to the past. Without her, he was truly adrift in time. That evening, back in his room at the facility, he still hadn't moved out, hadn't found his own place. As if leaving would make everything too real, James sat alone with a bottle of whiskey someone had given him. Modern whiskey, which tasted the same as old whiskey. Some things, thankfully, didn't change. There was a knock on his door. He almost didn't answer, but the knocking persisted. Finally, he opened it to find Dr. Sarah Nakamura, the physicist who'd been studying the aircraft. "Captain Whitmore, I'm sorry to intrude. I heard about Eleanor. I wanted to offer my condolences." "Thank you. May I come in? I have something I'd like to discuss with you." Curious despite his grief, James let her in. Dr. Nakamura sat in the room's single chair while James perched on the bed. She carried a tablet computer and several files. Captain, I've been analyzing data from the flight, comparing it with other unusual phenomena reported over the years. And I found something interesting. There have been other disappearances, aircraft, ships, even individual people, that vanished in circumstances similar to yours and were never found. The Bermuda Triangle reports, the disappearance of Frederick Valentich in Australia, several unreported incidents the military has classified. You think they traveled through time? I think it's possible. And here's what's more interesting. I've been tracking solar activity patterns, and I believe I can predict when conditions might be right for another event. Not with certainty, but with reasonable probability. James felt a chill. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to try to replicate the event. Under controlled conditions, with instruments aboard, we might be able to understand the mechanism. And if we understand it, we might be able to control it. Do you know what that would mean? We could potentially send people forward or backward in time intentionally. That's insane. So was your flight until it happened. Captain, the next predicted window is in 3 months. I've convinced the government to fund an experimental flight. We'd use a similar aircraft to your DC-3, we'd follow a similar flight path, and we'd attempt to trigger the same phenomenon. I want you to be the pilot. Absolutely not. I'm done flying. Captain, listen to me. What if one of those earlier disappearances had someone you cared about aboard? What if somewhere in time, there are people like you, displaced, lost, struggling to make sense of where they've ended up? Don't you want to understand what happened? Don't you want to help prevent it from happening accidentally to others or enable it to happen intentionally for the right reasons? James stood up, anger rising. You want to turn what happened to us into a tool? An experiment? We lost everything, Doctor, everything, and you want to do that to other people on purpose? I want to understand one of the universe's greatest mysteries. Yes, there are risks. Yes, there's moral complexity, but Captain, we've proven that time travel is possible. We can't unprove it. The question isn't whether humanity will explore this phenomenon. It's whether we do it carefully and scientifically, or recklessly through accident and ignorance. Find another pilot. There is no other pilot. No one else has experience with the phenomenon. No one else has successfully navigated through whatever that shimmer was. You're unique, Captain Whitmore. You're the only person in the world qualified for this mission. James looked at her, this earnest scientist who saw possibility where he saw only pain. Get out, Captain. Get out. Dr. Nakamura left, taking her files and her plans with her. James finished the bottle of whiskey and slept poorly, dreaming of Eleanor, of the shimmer in the sky of an aircraft tumbling through time forever, never landing. But over the following days, he couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. What if there were others out there lost in time? What if understanding the phenomenon could prevent future accidents or enable future miracles? He thought about Tommy Hendricks, who'd adapted so well. What if a dying person could skip forward 50 years to a time when medicine could cure them? What if historians could visit the past directly? What if families separated by death could be reunited across time? The implications were staggering and terrifying. 2 weeks after Dr. Nakamura's visit, James called her. Tell me more about this experimental flight. They met at a coffee shop, another modern marvel, these ubiquitous Starbucks chains that served coffee drinks with names like Venti and Macchiato, that James was still learning. Dr. Nakamura spread out her plans on the table. We've acquired a DC-3 similar to the one you flew. We've instrumented it with every sensor we can fit aboard. The flight would depart from a military base in Florida, fly the same route you took at the same time of day. During a period of predicted high solar activity, we'd have chase planes monitoring from a distance. If the phenomenon occurs and you transition through time, the instruments will record everything. And if I end up in 2053 or 1923, that's a risk. But Captain, you've already proven you can survive time displacement. You adapted to 2008. If you end up somewhere else, you'll adapt again. I'm 42 years old. How many jumps can one person survive? How many times can you lose everything and start over? I don't know. No one does. But consider this. Every person who's ever lived has eventually lost everything. Death takes it all. You've been given a strange gift. A chance to see beyond your natural timeline. Not many people get that. James thought of Eleanor, who'd lived a full life and died content. He thought of Michael, building a new relationship with his elderly first wife. He thought of Tommy, adapting with the resilience of childhood. He thought of all the chrononauts who'd found ways to make peace with their displacement. And he thought about his promise to Eleanor, to really live, "If I do this," he said slowly, "I have conditions. First, the crew is volunteer only, people who understand the risks. Second, if we do travel through time, we don't just take measurements and come back. We help anyone we find who's been displaced. We bring them home if we can. Third, this doesn't become a military program or a corporate venture. This is about understanding and helping, not exploitation. Those are good conditions. I think I can get the government to agree. Then I'll do it. But I need time to prepare, time to say goodbye to people, just in case. The window isn't for 3 months. You have time." James spent those 3 months wrapping up his affairs. He attended Tommy's 7th birthday party in Chicago, the boy who was now older than when he'd boarded Flight 914. He visited Michael and Susan in Portland, saw how they'd created a strange but genuine relationship that transcended age. He helped Patricia edit her book manuscript, offering his perspective on events they'd both lived through. He visited Eleanor's grave regularly, talking to her as if she could hear. "I'm going to fly again," he told the headstone. "I know I promised to move forward, and maybe that's what this is. Or maybe I'm just running away from a life I don't know how to live. I wish you could tell me which." The headstone offered no answer, but James felt a kind of peace anyway. Eleanor would have understood. She'd always understood. He reconnected with other chrononauts too. The priest, the jazz musician, the businessman, the schoolteacher. They'd formed a bond stronger than friendship, survivors of an impossible experience. Father O'Connor blessed the mission. Leonard played a jazz piece he'd composed called Temporal Blues. Harold gave James a letter to deliver to his younger self, if the experiment somehow sent him to 1964. "Tell me to hug my son more," the letter said. "Tell me every day counts." Finally, the day came. March 15th, 2009. James stood on the tarmac at Homestead Air Reserve Base, looking at the DC-3 that was so similar to the one he'd flown before. Dr. Nakamura and her team had filled it with instruments, but they'd left the cockpit largely original. It needed to be as similar as possible to the original flight. His crew consisted of 3 volunteers, a young Air Force pilot named Captain Jennifer Marks, who would serve as co-pilot, Dr. Nakamura herself, who insisted on experiencing the phenomenon firsthand, and Father O'Connor, who'd asked to come as the mission's chaplain. "If we're going to encounter the miraculous," the priest had said, "shouldn't there be a priest present?" They took off at 8:30 a.m., exactly as Flight 914 had. They flew the same route, same altitude, same heading. The sky was clear, crystalline, perfect for flying. James felt the old familiar joy of being in the cockpit, the sense of communion with the aircraft. This was where he belonged, had always belonged. At 8:45, approaching the area where the original phenomenon had occurred, the instruments began showing anomalous readings. Solar activity was spiking. The air ahead shimmered. "Here we go," James said quietly. "Everyone ready?" "Ready," Jennifer confirmed, her hands steady on the yoke. "Recording everything," Dr. Nakamura said from her station behind them. "God be with us," Father O'Connor prayed. The shimmer intensified, forming into that same vertical wall of impossible water that wasn't water. James felt the familiar tingling, the static electricity sensation. The instruments went wild, and then they were through. The world changed. The sky shifted to that strange pearl gray. The sun pulsed with alien light. Below, the landscape flickered and transformed. But this time, James wasn't afraid. He'd done this before. He knew they'd survive. When the phenomenon ended and the world stabilized, James checked the instruments, checked the view outside, and smiled. "Well," Jennifer asked, "when are we?" "Look at the ground," James said. "Look at the development patterns, the highway system. I'd say we're somewhere around 1985. 1985? Dr. Nakamura was already checking her instruments. "We went backward, not forward. Time travel doesn't seem to have a preferred direction," James observed. "We should head for Miami, find out exactly when we are, and see if we can make contact with, well, with ourselves." They flew on toward Miami, toward an unknown date in the past, toward whatever consequences and wonders awaited them. Father O'Connor prayed quietly. Dr. Nakamura recorded everything. Jennifer flew with the steady competence of a good pilot, and James Whitmore sat in the captain's seat, a man out of time flying through time itself, and felt something he hadn't felt since Eleanor died. Purpose. He'd made a promise to really live, and this impossible mission to understand the universe's strangest phenomenon, was how he'd keep that promise. Below, 1985, Miami sprawled in its colorful MTV-era glory. They'd have questions to answer, explanations to give, and eventually a journey back to 2009 to complete. But for now, James was flying, was useful, was part of something bigger than his own loss. The DC-3's engines hummed steadily. The instruments showed everything functioning normally, and somewhere in the mystery of time itself, 57 displaced people were learning to build new lives, proving that humans could adapt to anything, even the impossible. James smiled and began his radio call to Miami Approach Control. Another landing, another arrival, another chance to help someone who might be lost in time's endless stream. Eleanor had been right. The future, any when, was full of possibilities for those brave enough to embrace them. The aircraft flew on through 1985 sunshine, carrying 4 time travelers toward whatever adventure awaited. And in the cockpit, Captain James Whitmore finally felt at home. Not in any particular time, but in the eternal now of flight itself, where past and future collapsed into the simple, perfect present of keeping an aircraft in the sky. Some journeys, he realized, never truly end. They just keep transforming, keep offering new destinations, keep challenging us to be brave enough for the next impossible thing. He was ready.